She was screaming and thrashing, and my mother just said, "Don't look. If you do, you're next." That's the first memory I have of death. Not in a hospital bed, not in an accident, but on the floor of our living room, lit by a flickering yellow lamp. My sister's body twisted beneath my father's fists, the thud of her head hitting the wood, over and over, a wet, ugly sound I can still hear when I close my eyes. I was 8, too old to not understand, too young to survive what I was seeing. I was standing barefoot on the cold floor, one hand pressed against the peeling wall, holding my breath like my lungs had forgotten how to work. My eyes were locked on her body, shaking, trying to get away. She kept saying no, 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 but my father didn't stop. He didn't even look human. His face was red, his jaw clenched, spitting every word like it was poison. Slut, liar, disgrace. I didn't understand what she had done. I still don't. I don't think there was anything to understand. My mother sat 5 feet away. She stirred her tea, stirred it like it was just another evening. I waited for her to get up, to scream, to cry, to do anything, but she didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed on the spoon in her cup, and when I looked at her, begging with my eyes, all she said was, "Don't look. Don't you dare look." So I stood there, not looking, but seeing everything. My sister's hands clawed at the floor. Her nails broke on the wood. Her legs kicked out and then went limp. Her mouth hung open like she was trying to say something, but the words got stuck. Then she stopped moving, just like that. No final breath, no cinematic goodbye, just stillness. My father stood up and wiped his forehead. He lit a cigarette. The room smelled like smoke and sweat and something metallic, something that made my stomach turn. Blood pooled under her head, seeping into the cracks of the floorboards. He looked down at her body and said, "She asked for it." And then he left the room. I remember hearing the screen door slam. The sound was sharp, final. My mother kept sipping her tea, and I, frozen, stayed in that corner until the house went silent. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink, because deep inside me something already knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a nightmare we'd all wake up from. This was how things worked here. And if I wanted to keep breathing, I had to follow the rules. Don't speak. Don't ask. Don't feel. The body stayed there for a while. I don't know how long. It could have been minutes. Could have been hours. I didn't dare move. At some point, my mother stood up, stepped over the body and walked into the kitchen. I heard the faucet run. Water filled the bucket. She came back with a rag and started scrubbing the floor, humming a song I used to love. I watched the blood smear, then fade. She poured bleach, opened the windows, wiped every surface twice. Then she told me to go to bed. I don't remember walking to my room, but I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if my sister was going to come back, if maybe she was just sleeping, maybe someone would come and help, a neighbor, a police car, a teacher, anyone. But no one came. No one ever did. The next morning, she was gone. No trace, no smell, no blood, no body. Her bed was made. Her clothes were gone. Her toothbrush, her backpack, her favorite stuffed rabbit. Erased, like she had never existed, like I had imagined her. At breakfast, my father buttered his toast. My mother made coffee. I sat there in silence, watching the eggs on my plate go cold. No one mentioned her name, not once, not that day, not the next, not ever. When I finally asked, quietly, cautiously, my voice barely a whisper, my mother looked at me and said, "She went to live with your aunt. Don't ask again." But we didn't have an aunt, and that's when I knew. She hadn't just been killed, she'd been erased, deleted from our lives like a mistake in a notebook. And I was expected to keep writing the story, pretending that page never existed. But I remembered every detail. I remembered the sound of her skull, the look in her eyes when she realized no one would save her, the exact spot on the floor where her blood soaked through the wood. I remembered how my mother scrubbed that spot 3 times. I remembered the way the light caught the red streaks on her rag. I remembered the way I tasted metal in my mouth, and didn't know if it was hers or mine, and I remembered the silence, the thick, choking silence that settled over our house like a blanket soaked in cement. I started hearing things at night, not voices, not words, just her breath, her last breath, over and over in my closet, under my bed, behind the door. I would hold my pillow tight and squeeze my eyes shut, but it never stopped. I wasn't scared of her. I was scared of forgetting her, because that's what they wanted, for me to forget, for me to move on like she never mattered. But she did matter. She was loud. She laughed like thunder. She used to draw stars on the window with her fingers when it fogged up in winter. She used to sneak cookies under my pillow when I had nightmares. She was real. She was mine. And they took her. They made me watch. And I did nothing, because I was 8, and I was next. The morning after my sister died, the sun rose like nothing had happened. The sky outside was pink and soft. Birds chirped like they always did. And inside the house, the world had shifted into something colder, something unnatural. When I stepped into the living room, the floor was spotless. Not a drop of blood, not a trace of her body. The rug was back in place. The furniture had been moved slightly, like someone had wiped everything beneath it. My mother was mopping, humming the same tune she always did when she cleaned. It was a song from an old record, something cheerful, out of place. I stood there staring at her hands, at the way she dipped the mop into a bucket that smelled like bleach and lemons, like she was cleaning up spilled milk. I looked at the floor where my sister had fallen. I remembered the way her head bounced, the way the blood spread from under her like a stain no one could stop. But now it was gone, scrubbed, sanitized, like she had never been there. My mother didn't look at me, she just said, "Go wash up. Breakfast is almost ready." I didn't move. My legs wouldn't work right. I was still in the same pajamas, my feet freezing against the floor. My mouth was dry. I whispered, "Where is she?" My mother kept mopping, the same slow motion back and forth. She didn't answer. I asked again, louder this time. She turned her head slightly and said, "She went to stay with your aunt." And that was it. That was all I was allowed to know. But we didn't have an aunt. At least not one who ever visited. Not one I had ever heard her talk to on the phone. Not one whose address I knew. And I think that was the point. It was supposed to be vague, just enough to shut me up. By lunchtime, my sister's clothes were gone from the dresser. Her toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. Her school books, the posters on her wall, her drawings taped to the mirror, all of it vanished. The trash cans were full of paper, ripped notebooks, pieces of photo albums. I watched my father carry out her backpack and dump it in the burn barrel behind the shed. He poured gasoline on it like it was just another pile of garbage. Then he lit a match and didn't even flinch as the flames swallowed everything. I stayed by the window, watching the smoke rise. I didn't know how to mourn someone I wasn't allowed to talk about. That evening, I went to the hallway where her bedroom used to be. The door was open. Her mattress was stripped. The closet was empty. There was no smell left, no scent of her shampoo or her old perfume. It was like someone had vacuumed her out of existence. Every trace of her was gone, except one. On the back of the closet door, faint and nearly invisible, were 3 scratches. Claw marks, really. As if someone had tried to hold on, as if someone had been dragged away. I ran my fingers over them, pressing into the grooves like they might open a door. But nothing happened, just silence. At school, the teachers didn't say anything. No announcements, no moment of silence. Her name was skipped during roll call, and no one corrected it. When I looked at my classmates, some stared back like they knew. Others avoided my eyes altogether. One girl, the one who used to braid my sister's hair during recess, handed me a folded note. I opened it behind the dumpster. It said, I heard screaming. I'm sorry. But that was it. No name, no offer of help. Just sorry. That word followed me everywhere. Sorry whispered in glances. Sorry spoken in half smiles and hurried steps. Everyone around me had heard something. Everyone had felt the house shake. But no one did anything. And now, no one wanted to remember. One afternoon, I searched the attic for anything left behind. A sock, a notebook, a scrap of something. But there was nothing. My mother had erased her like she was wiping a chalkboard. I don't know how long it took her to remove every photo, every letter, every drawing on the fridge. But she did. She even painted over the wall where we had measured our heights every birthday. Just covered it with beige paint like the past never happened. I stood in front of that wall and traced my sister's last mark in the paint with my fingernail. It had been 2 inches taller than mine. Now it was gone. The silence wasn't just in the house. It was in the neighborhood too. Our neighbors, the ones who had lived next door since I was born, never asked about her. They saw me walking to school alone. They saw the trash bags full of her belongings. But no one asked. I heard whispers sometimes, late at night when people thought I wasn't listening. But they never spoke to me. Not directly. Not like they cared. Because caring would mean doing something, and doing something would mean confronting him. No one wanted to confront him. My father was a foreman at the local mill, a respected man, church-going, clean-cut. People greeted him on Sundays like he was some kind of pillar. My mother kept the house perfect. She smiled at the grocery store, brought casseroles to funerals, played the role of a good wife so well that no one questioned her. And me? I learned to smile too. Learned to nod and say yes ma'am and yes sir. Learned to keep my hands folded and my mouth shut. I learned that truth was dangerous, that remembering was dangerous, that asking questions got people killed. So I tried to forget. But forgetting isn't something the heart does willingly, especially when love is mixed with grief. I would see a jacket in a store window and think, she would have loved that. I would hear a song on the radio and remember the way she used to sing it into her hairbrush, standing on the bed like a rock star. I would wake up from dreams where she was still alive, her hand in mine, her voice whispering stories, only to find my room dark and empty and cold. One night, I found one of her earrings under the radiator, a little gold star, slightly bent. I held it in my palm until it left an imprint in my skin. It was proof she had been real, proof I hadn't made her up. I buried it in the backyard under the swing set, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted her to have a place, somewhere that no one could scrub away. I visited that spot every day, sat by it, talked to it, told it about school, about books I read, about the dreams I was too afraid to speak out loud. It was my way of keeping her alive, quietly, secretly, like a prayer with no amen. Inside the house, the silence grew heavier. It had shape and weight. It pressed on my chest. It followed me like a shadow. There were no more family dinners, no birthdays, no holidays, just routines, just survival. My mother cooked. My father read the paper. I pretended to exist. But under that, I was watching, remembering, collecting pieces, waiting, because deep down, I knew something they didn't. Erasing her didn't make her disappear, not from me. And what they didn't count on was that silence can be broken, even if it takes years, even if it has to start with a whisper, even if that whisper comes from a girl who was never supposed to speak again. After my sister disappeared, something shifted in my father's eyes. He didn't have to say it out loud. I felt it. I felt it in the way his gaze started to linger longer when I walked into the room, in the way his voice dropped an octave when he called my name. The house didn't just go quiet, it got colder. It was like he had cleared one obstacle, and now I was the next in line. There was no ceremony about it, no dramatic moment of threat, just a slow, creeping shift in the atmosphere, a tightening of the air. I was 9, still small, still quiet, but I knew the language of fear better than most adults. I had seen what happened when you asked questions. I had seen what happened when you fought back. So I learned to avoid his eyes. I stopped talking unless I was spoken to. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. I became invisible, or at least I tried to. But invisibility only works if no one is watching, and he was always watching. He started with little things, comments about how I was growing, how I looked more like my mother each day. He would brush my hair too slowly, too carefully. His hands would rest on my shoulders a little too long. He'd stand in the doorway while I changed, pretending not to look, but always there, always silent. At first I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was being paranoid, that maybe this was just what fathers did. But deep inside, I knew better, because his silence had weight, his touch had warning. One night, I was brushing my teeth when he walked into the bathroom without knocking. He stood there, blocking the door, arms crossed, watching me. The air between us tightened. I gripped the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. He smiled, said nothing, then left. I stayed there for 10 more minutes, toothbrush still in my hand, afraid to move. The next morning my mother said I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic, that he was just checking on me. But there was something in her voice, something clipped and sharp, like she knew, like she didn't want to admit what she knew, like she had already chosen her side. After that, I started locking my door at night. I'd wedge a chair under the handle and push my dresser in front of it. It never stopped him. He had keys to everything, but it gave me a few seconds, just enough to hide, just enough to pretend I had control. He never hit me, not the way he hit my sister, but the threat of it hovered like smoke. Instead, he broke me in smaller ways. He tore up my homework if I made a mistake. He poured out my cereal if I spilled a drop. He ripped the heads off my dolls one by one and lined them up on my pillow. When I cried, he told me I was weak, that I needed to toughen up, that the world didn't care about tears. My mother said he was just strict, said he was teaching me to be strong, that I'd thank him someday. At school, I became a shadow. I didn't speak in class. I didn't eat lunch with the other kids. I flinched when people touched me. My teachers noticed. One of them, Mrs. Collins, pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. I said yes. I said everything was fine, and I smiled. I had learned to lie with my teeth, because telling the truth meant danger. Telling the truth meant punishment. One day I got a B on a math quiz. My father opened the fridge and threw a glass jar at my feet. It shattered across the kitchen tiles. Vinegar and glass and green beans splattered everywhere. He looked at me and said, "You get one more grade like that and I swear to God I'll make you wish you were never born." Then he went back to reading the paper, like nothing happened. That night, I knelt on the floor and picked up every piece of glass with my bare hands. My fingers bled. My mother watched from the hallway. She didn't move, just stood there with her arms crossed and said, "If you paid attention in class, he wouldn't be so angry." I stopped dreaming after that. Sleep became a war zone. I'd wake up gasping. Sometimes I'd find my door cracked open when I was sure I'd locked it. Once I woke up with my blankets folded at the foot of the bed and my pajama buttons undone. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. The only person who might have believed me was gone, burned, buried, scrubbed away. I began keeping a notebook under my mattress. I wrote in it every night, not just what happened, but how I felt, how scared I was, how alone. I wrote down everything because I knew if I didn't, I'd start to forget who I was. And forgetting would mean he won. My handwriting changed over time. It got smaller, tighter. I stopped using colors. The words became sharper, less emotional, more facts, as if I was documenting evidence, not feelings, a case file, a log. Because part of me started to believe that maybe someone would find it one day. Maybe someone would read it and understand what was really happening in that house. But no one came. One afternoon, I walked home from school and saw a bird lying dead on our front porch. Its neck twisted, its wings bent backward. It wasn't just dead. It had been posed, arranged, like a message, like a warning. I stepped over it and walked inside. That night he didn't say a word at dinner, just watched me, smiling. I stopped eating after that. I figured if I could make myself small enough, maybe he'd forget about me. Maybe he'd stop looking. I counted calories, skipped meals, hid food under my bed. My ribs started to show. My clothes hung loose. The school nurse called my mother. She said I was going through a phase. Every room in that house had eyes, the walls, the floors, the ceiling. I learned where the creaks were, which stairs groaned the loudest. which spots in the hallway let you listen without being heard. It became a game of survival, a game with no winners. The day I found the scratch marks behind the dresser in my sister's room, I realized something. I wasn't the first. And if I didn't do something, I wouldn't be the last. The fear wasn't just something I carried. It was something passed down, a legacy, a tradition, and I was expected to accept it, to wear it like a coat, to pass it on to whoever came next. But I wasn't ready to be next. Not yet. Not ever. When my little sister was born, I remember thinking maybe she would be our way out. A fresh start, a reason for the house to soften, for the screaming to stop, for the air to clear. But I was wrong. What came was not hope. It was a repeat, another cycle beginning from the first breath. She was tiny, pink, and fragile. She cried often as babies do, and I watched my mother rock her with the same arms that had held me. The same arms that had stayed crossed the night my father crushed the life out of our sister in front of us. I kept expecting something to be different, but nothing changed. My father barely looked at the baby at first. He treated her like a pet he didn't ask for. Indifference, cold observation, until one day, that look came back into his eyes, the one I knew too well, the one that lingered, and I felt the shift again. She was barely walking when it started. Not with violence, not with words, with choices, with who got what, who got smiled at, who was ignored. He started calling her by her middle name, a name no one had used before, said it sounded better, more proper. My mother followed along, correcting me if I used her real name. It was subtle, but I knew what it meant. He wanted to rename her, to own her. By the time she was 3, he had taught her to say yes, sir, every time he spoke. She wasn't allowed to say no. If she did, my mother would take her by the wrist and squeeze hard enough to leave bruises and whisper through clenched teeth, "You do not disobey him, ever." The first time I heard her say I'm sorry when she hadn't done anything, my stomach flipped. That word again, sorry, a weapon disguised as a virtue. I started watching them like a scientist watching a storm, counting the warning signs, the quiet spells before the outbursts, the sudden praise before the punishment. She would sit on his lap while he watched TV, her tiny hands clutching his shirt. I could see the way his fingers curled around her waist, the way he stared at her, not like a father, but like a man claiming something that wasn't his. I knew what came next, and I couldn't stop it. I tried. God, I tried. I stayed close to her. I taught her not to undress in front of anyone. I told her bedtime stories about monsters that looked like people. I whispered warnings disguised as fairy tales. But she was too young, too trusting. She thought I was just being dramatic. She didn't know I had already lived through the fire she was walking into. One evening, my father told me to clean out the basement. I knew better than to question. The basement had always been his space, full of old tools, rusted nails, boxes of junk we were never allowed to open. I went down with gloves and a trash bag, and that's when I found it. A small, locked wooden box hidden behind an old dresser. Inside were photographs of my sister, not the oldest, the youngest, my baby sister, sleeping, bathing, sometimes just standing in her room, but always through a lens, always taken without her knowing. Some of them were blurred, some looked cropped, but they were all wrong, all twisted. I couldn't breathe, I didn't cry. I just closed the box, locked it back, and shoved it deep into the garbage bag beneath broken wires and a moldy quilt. I buried it under layers of trash until I was sure no one would find it. I didn't know what scared me more, the proof, or the knowledge that I had known without needing it. When I went back upstairs, he was smiling, sitting on the couch with my sister on his lap. I wanted to scream, but I knew how that would end. So I kept walking, past them, past the lies, into my bedroom, where I collapsed and vomited into a pillow. The next day, she came home from school crying. Her teacher had asked her why she flinched when someone tapped her shoulder. She told them she had a bad dream. She said she missed her older sister. That was me. I hugged her in our shared bedroom and promised her nothing would ever hurt her. But I didn't believe myself. I started documenting things, times, places, what he said, what he did. I made copies of her drawings when they showed shadows or scary faces. I took photos of the bruises she couldn't explain. My mother caught me once. Flipping through her backpack, she grabbed my wrist and said, "You will not ruin this family. Do you understand me? Ruin it." As if it hadn't already been shattered long ago. The worst part was watching my sister slowly become quieter. She used to hum while she colored. She used to sing herself to sleep. That stopped. Her eyes started darting around the room like she was tracking something invisible. She clung to me more, slept curled up against my back. And sometimes she said things like, "I feel like someone watches me at night." Or Daddy says, "I shouldn't tell anyone when I'm sad." Those words broke something inside me. I knew then that I was failing her, the way the world had failed my other sister, the way our mother kept failing both of us. One night I heard her crying through the wall, small broken sounds. I got up and found her on the bathroom floor, holding her stuffed bear, rocking back and forth. Her pajama top was buttoned wrong. Her hair was wet. She said, "I didn't want to, but he said I had to." I held her until she fell asleep in my lap. My hands were shaking so hard, I thought my bones would crack. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I went into the backyard and dug in the same spot where I had buried my other sister's earring. I placed a note there, a note that said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't strong enough, but I will be." And I meant it, because watching one sister die is unbearable. But watching another be broken piece by piece, while you breathe the same air as the man who is doing it, is something else entirely. It's war, and I was done being silent. It started with a broken chair leg, one of the old wooden ones that used to sit around the kitchen table before my father replaced them with plastic. I found it in the attic while digging through boxes of blankets and rusted Christmas ornaments that smelled like mothballs and mold. I was looking for something to wrap my sister's birthday present in. Just something simple. She was turning 7. I had saved a little money and bought her a small necklace shaped like a crescent moon. I thought maybe if I gave her something beautiful, she would remember there was still light in the world, even if it was just a flicker. But when I reached down to move the broken chair leg aside, I noticed a box, small, dusty, covered in spider webs and hidden behind a stack of cracked photo frames. It didn't look like much, just a plain cardboard box sealed with 2 pieces of old duct tape. But something about it pulled me in, like it was waiting. I peeled the tape slowly. My fingers were trembling and cold. Inside were a few folded papers, a plastic comb, and a soft blue notebook with a sticker half peeled from the cover. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized the handwriting before I even opened it. It was hers, my sister, the one they erased. The moment I touched the pages, I felt her, like she had been hiding all this time in that attic, waiting for someone to listen. Her handwriting was slightly slanted, the loops of her letters wide and soft. She had used purple ink. Some of the pages were smudged with what I can only guess were tears, or maybe blood. I could barely process what I was seeing. The first page was dated 2 months before she died. It started simple, just little thoughts. "I hate when he stares at me. I don't feel safe in the kitchen. I wish I had a lock on my door." Then the words became heavier. "He came into my room again. Mom pretended not to see. I told her. She told me to be quiet. She said I make him mad." The entries got darker, more desperate. She started writing about how she planned to leave. She listed bus routes, towns she thought she could disappear into. She talked about saving money in a tin hidden under her bed, about asking her teacher for help, then deciding against it. She was scared. She was so scared. One page broke me completely. It was just 4 lines, short, jagged, written in red pen. "If I die, it wasn't an accident. Please tell someone. Please don't forget me." I read that over and over until the words blurred. My chest felt like it was cracking open. I rocked back and forth with that notebook in my lap, whispering her name like a prayer, like I was trying to call her back. She had tried. She had screamed. She had begged, and no one listened. I turned the pages slowly, scared of what else I might find, but I couldn't stop. I owed it to her. Her words became frantic near the end, short entries, sentences that trailed off. There was one where she wrote about blood on her sheets, another about him locking her in the closet for hours. She said she thought she was going crazy, that maybe it was better to just let it happen. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the book. But there was one last page. It wasn't like the others. The handwriting was calm, centered on the paper, no smudges, no stains. It said, "If you're reading this, you survived." And that means I did too. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest like it was her heart still beating, like I had found her again. She wasn't gone, not completely. Her words had survived the fire, the silence, the bleach, the lies. They had waited, and now they were mine to carry. I didn't tell my mother I found it. I didn't tell my father. I didn't even tell my sister, not yet. I hid the notebook inside the lining of my school backpack, sewing the fabric shut with black thread. I walked around with it against my spine every day, like armor, like proof, like a weapon. And with it came a new feeling, not rage, not even grief, clarity. I started to see things differently. I started noticing the cracks, the small ways my mother flinched when my father raised his voice, the way she drank her tea too fast when he was in the room, the way my sister tensed when he walked by, how she stopped drawing with crayons and started writing her name over and over on scraps of paper, like she was trying to remember who she was. I saw it all, and I wrote. I started my own notebook, one that looked nothing like my sister's. Mine was black, plain. I didn't decorate it. I didn't use purple ink. I used pencil because I didn't want it to bleed. I wanted it to be clean, precise, cold. I wrote down everything, every bruise, every stare, every time he told me to keep quiet, every time she cried and my mother told her to grow up. I wrote down the exact dates, times, and words. I made diagrams of where people were standing. I made lists of what was said and what was left unsaid. I copied entries from my sister's notebook word for word. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. I became obsessed with details. I memorized emergency numbers. I mapped escape routes. I started studying psychology from library books, learning about trauma, about patterns, about the way abuse cycles through generations, like a disease that no one talks about. I realized my mother had once been me, that maybe she had never escaped either, that maybe she had chosen to blend into the horror rather than fight it. But I didn't want that. I didn't want to become another ghost inside that house, another memory scrubbed clean. Late one night, while everyone slept, I sat on the edge of my bed with the notebook open and read every word my sister had written again. I whispered her name. I thanked her. I promised her I would do what she couldn't. I would not disappear, and neither would she. The morning I decided to speak, the sky was gray. The kind of gray that makes everything feel colder than it really is. I remember standing in front of the mirror brushing my sister's hair before school. She was quiet, her shoulders stiff, her eyes dull. I asked her if she had slept. She shrugged. I asked her if anything happened. She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. It echoed the same kind of silence I had once swallowed, the same kind that had almost killed me. I watched her in the reflection, and I saw myself. I saw the girl who used to sing to herself while doing homework, who loved purple nail polish, who dreamed of working in a library because books always felt safer than people. That girl had been buried under fear, and I was about to lose another version of her. Again, I kissed the top of her head and told her I'd walk her to school that day. At the front gate, instead of heading home, I turned and walked back into the building. Straight past the main office, down the hallway that smelled of disinfectant and paper, and stopped outside the counselor's door. My hands were shaking so hard, I had to clench them into fists. I didn't knock. I walked in and said, "I need help." The counselor, Mrs. Bell, looked up with concern, but no judgment. She asked me to sit. I told her no. If I sat, I would collapse. So I stood and I told her everything. I told her about my sister, about the bruises, about the silence, about the notebooks. I didn't cry. I didn't whisper. I let the words fall hard and sharp like broken glass, each one cutting through the years I had spent pretending, each one a wound that finally got to bleed in the light. She listened, really listened. When I finished, she placed her hand gently over mine. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She didn't suggest I go home and think it over. She picked up the phone and called the authorities. I was taken into protective custody that afternoon. The air outside felt different. Colder, yes, but clearer, like something had been lifted from my chest, like I could breathe for the first time without apologizing for it. My little sister came with me. They kept us together. At first she was scared. She thought we were in trouble. But I held her hand in the back of the car and told her we were free now. She didn't understand what that meant, but in time, she would. The foster home wasn't perfect. The sheets were stiff, and the other kids were wary. But no one raised their voice. No one watched us with hunger in their eyes. No one told us to lie, and that made it heaven. We stayed there for months. Slowly, my sister started smiling again. She drew pictures. She laughed at cartoons. She asked to paint her nails pink. I kept writing. I filled 3 more notebooks. I handed them to the caseworker during our hearings. I testified in court. My mother cried, not because she regretted anything, but because her world was unraveling. My father denied everything, called me a liar, said I was brainwashing my sister. The judge didn't believe him. The evidence was too much, too real. His sentence wasn't long enough in my eyes, but it was something, a record, a declaration to the world that what he did mattered, that my sister's pain mattered, that my silence finally became a scream loud enough to be heard. We were eventually adopted by a couple who had no children of their own. They were kind. They didn't ask too many questions. They didn't force us to talk. They let us heal at our own pace. They gave us room to sleep with the lights on, to eat in silence, to cry without explanation. Years passed. I finished school. I studied psychology. I wanted to understand how people survive what they're not supposed to, how some wounds never close but still stop bleeding. I started working with children, kids like me, kids like my sister, kids who carry silence like a second skin. I told them stories, not all the details, not the darkest parts, but enough to let them know they weren't alone, that monsters sometimes live in the same house, that surviving is a victory even when it doesn't feel like one. My sister grew into a woman full of fire. She became a writer. She says words saved her. I believe her. We still talk about that night sometimes, about the notebook, about the attic, about the ghosts that visit when it gets too quiet. But now we talk without shame, without fear. And sometimes late at night, I read the last line from my sister's journal again. If you're reading this, you survived. And that means I did too. To the one who never got to grow old, to the one they tried to erase, this story is yours. You live in every breath I take, in every step my sister walks free, in every voice I help find the courage to speak. And to anyone out there holding pain in silence, I want you to know this. You are not alone. Your story matters, and you deserve to be heard. Thank you for listening. If this story moved something inside you, if it opened a door you had locked for too long, you're not alone anymore. There is more ahead, stories of strength, of survival, of the light that finds its way through the darkest rooms. Stay with us. The next video is on your screen. Let your healing begin.